All right, welcome back to the Navel Gaze. We are going to do a reaction video to some existing YouTube content. We've been wanting to do a. There's a lot of YouTube videos and other content, but YouTube videos are the easiest to react to in this again format. But about trans men talking about their experience of changing from being a lesbian to being attracted to men post transition, and how common this is. And it happens to so many friends. It happened to all the people online. It happened and then just kind of trying to offer their explanation as to why that happens. And it's usually about feeling confident in yourself and stuff like that. That's what I was originally looking for, one of those videos. I hadn't seen one in a while, and that's what we want to do a reaction to with our AAP framework. But I actually stumbled on something even better, I think, as far as showcasing AAP and a lesser known or commented on version of AAP. I guess we would call it partial AAP.
Yeah.
As same as the partial AGP, which is what we know of as AGAMP, right? Where they're attracted to a trans woman is attracted to the idea of being a trans woman and not a woman. And so, yeah, that's the AGAMP experience. And we've realized in the last few months, I'd say, or at least that's in the last few months is when I came to realize that there is a female equivalent of that, which is, basically females who are attracted to the idea of being trans men, of not actually being male, but of being a trans man. And the two in this video, we think, highlight both of those perfectly, the kind of regular AAP experience and the more partial AAP experience. So.
Yeah, and we're excited to go through this one. I didn't even watch the full thing. I watched some of it, but this is, going to be a somewhat fresh react. But this one is cool because, like Aaron said, it's sort of trans people who are fully bought into the ideology or whatever that means, talking about it from their perspective and saying sort of just being trans changed our sexuality. And it is interesting to see how the different sort of sides of this culture war address that issue, because you have the trans people saying, right, I became more confident, more comfortable. You have some of them saying, basically, I've always been queer and my queerness just manifested in a different direction, in a different way after I transitioned. And then you have the gender criticals, some of whom will attribute this change in sexual orientation to exogenous hormones. They'll attribute it to HRT, to testosterone. They'll attribute it sometimes to trauma. They'll attribute it to, even if it wasn't a change in sexual orientation, they'll say that the introduction of testosterone basically made these females essentially hornier and their inhibitions were lowered. And so while I think there's probably some merit to that, I think that also takes on somewhat of a dark interpretation of they were sort of, when they were sleeping with men, they were actively doing something that wasn't good for them and not what they would have chosen if they were sort of testosterone sober. But so these are the ways that these different sides talk about this. And obviously Aaron and I think that the much simpler explanation is autoheterosexuality, is that they always had this propensity towards attraction to the opposite sex. But basically that, for a myriad reasons, we could say perhaps most prominently their own body and their dysphoria basically playing a role in how comfortable they can be with opposite sex relationships, that transitioning and changing your body kind of frees that up. So yeah, without further ado, shall we start streaming this?
Let's dig in.
All right.
Also, I just find these two kind of likable, even though obviously they're drunk on the gender juice, but there's something endearing about them, I find.
I agree. Oh yeah, that's something else I wanted to say too, is, can you see it?
Yeah, I need to add it to the screen here.
Okay.
There we go.
That's something else I wanted to say also.
If you want to full screen it though, that way.
Yes.
Perfect.
We'll
stay in here. Okay, cool.
But yeah, I mean, this should go without saying for people who are familiar with our content, but a lot of people react to trans content online, and it's usually to make fun of these people. And while we're going to disagree with some of the ways that they view being trans and their interpretations potentially of their experiences, it's not that fun to dunk on trans people, frankly, especially now with the sort of cultural shift and political tides turning. I think it's unbecoming, frankly.
Yeah.
But so anyway, we're not gonna hold back what we feel, but you know, that type of commentary is not really our goal.
No.
All right, shall I begin?
Let us go.
Okay, you just let me know when you want me to stop it at any point. I mean, it's not that long, so we might make it all the way through, but you just let me know, Aaron.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Actually, this video is about me and Lewis coming out as lovers. Our first time together. Lots of people do think that me and Fox.
We were an item.
Yeah, well, people did. You remember, like, weren't we on about some fan fiction?
Oh, yeah, we stumbled on some fan fiction.
No, we did. I don't think we actually did. I think just we liked the idea. Anyway, so this video, it's about sexuality and being trans. Your sexuality is who you're attracted to, so whether that's females or males or non-binary people or just people. Being trans is all about the gender you are, not feeling the gender you were assigned at birth.
It's like gender first and then sexuality. So you work out who you fancy based on who you are.
Actually, let's pause.
I've always been attracted to female.
But that is a very that's metasexuality, right? It's like you figure out who you're attracted to only after you figure out who you are. Like who you're attracted to is an extension of who you see yourself as. He's basically saying the root of our sexuality is our gender identity, and that is autosexuality or autoheterosexuality.
Yeah, and this is so cool because it is almost like these two guys. You know, this video is already 4 years old or so, but they're almost unencumbered by some of the even TRA talking points, right? And so, right, they were saying, yeah, my sexual interest really is downstream of how I see myself. Whereas what they were kind of saying, but what the TRA talking point is, gender and sexuality are two completely distinct things, right? Gender is who you are on the inside, and sexuality is who you know, are with on the outside and all of that stuff. But there's this acknowledgement from people who are not bought into Blanchardian typology at all, that who they are attracted to is very dependent on or is intertwined with how they see themselves and how they see their gender, or, you know, if we get rid of the word gender, how they see their sex role, whether that's, you know, whether that's accurate or not, but that's what they're talking about here.
Yep.
Identified people, but before I transitioned, I used to freak out at being called like a lesbian. In fact, one of my best mates, she was gay, but she wouldn't tell me for years because she thought I was homophobic. Because when people used to say to me that I was a lesbian, I'd be like, no, I'm not. I was only a kid, like 15, 16, but it was just that the term lesbian felt so wrong to fit with me.
Yeah.
I had to stop again. That's another one that is really interesting and that I sort of noticed through talking to my wife about it, but kind of makes sense in the AAP, or at least in the concept of dysphoria, in the realm of dysphoria, is my wife expressed that too. And I remember when she and I were talking about AAP in the beginning and sort of wrestling with whether that explains her experience, I remember commenting to her that it was surprising that she didn't find this theory to be threatening, that she didn't sort of feel like an identity insecurity in some way, you know. And I remember saying this to her and she was like, why would it? And I was like, well, you know, essentially the core of the theory, or one aspect of the theory, is that you're straight, or there's some straight part of you, right? That you're not just exclusively and only a lesbian. And she said, yeah, she never related to the word lesbian. That was never like an identity that in fact, her response was lesbian always felt like too girly of a word. It didn't. And
Right.
That's kind of what he's describing here. Like he wasn't homophobic. He wasn't against lesbians, right? But his friend got the impression that he might be because that word was like
Right.
almost a trigger for him.
Right, because you have to be a woman to be a lesbian. And so
Right.
it's immediately implied with the word itself. And so, yeah, you see that a lot with, yeah, FTMs or whatever who, yeah, I'm exclusively attracted to women, but won't say lesbian because, again, that implies they themselves are a woman. But then
Right.
you find a lot of other AAPs I find actually gravitate to the word lesbian, especially like when they put in the caveat of butch, because they almost find like it's the way to separate themselves from regular feminine women. It's like, okay, but I can be like, they kind of make the word lesbian mean like this. Yeah.
I think there's some attempt at subversion there too, probably, right? It's like, yeah, like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm a lesbian, especially if they're trying to really pass as a man and still calling themselves a lesbian. I mean, Frankie messes around with this too, and Frankie's, you know, self-aware in that sense, and you know, like working these things out live. But yeah, there's like something transgressive, I think, to
Yeah.
Frankie at least, right, about owning the butch label while, you know, being a testo butch, right, with post-top surgery and all of this stuff. But yeah, there's this interesting point that it seems like dysphoric females, trans men, or what we're hypothesizing are autoandrophiles, are uncomfortable with not necessarily with their sexuality, which again, I want to make that clear because this is something that the gender criticals lean on a lot. And I'm not going to say
Yeah.
that no one's ever felt shame about their sexuality and that was a motivator for them to transition. But these people, like my wife, they did not feel ashamed about their attraction to women. They did not feel ashamed about their same-sex attraction. They felt uncomfortable with the feminine terms associated with their attraction, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I think that is another case of kind of misidentifying internalized homophobia in auto-heterosexuals. Is like what we're actually, averse to is being labeled as a member of our actual sex. It's not the external sexual attraction. It's what, being a lesbian implies about the self, not the attraction. Autogynophobia, not internalized homophobia.
Yes. And this is just making me think about like, this is a recurring issue. And to a certain extent, I don't blame people because I think it's like a logical track to follow. But I think something that we've talked about before is how gender criticals will misinterpret a trans person's description of like how they knew they were trans, right? Or like their evidence of their transness as succumbing to gender stereotypes, right? And it's like you're kind of only hearing this top level thing and you're taking away your interpretation of it. And of course that is their interpretation because a lot of the gender critical politics stem from radical feminist politics, right? And so there is that inclination there. But it's like we were saying, well, no, actually, it's a misinterpretation. These people are expressing the sort of tangible things that other people identify in these sexed and gendered ways and trying to use those. They're trying to communicate this internal desire. I think it's a similar thing when people say, I never wanted to be a lesbian. I never felt like a lesbian. It's like, oh, look, that's internalized homophobia. It's like, or again, it's discomfort with the lesbian. Because like my wife said, she's fine with the gay label.
Right.
Because gay either means men or, you know, it's more ambiguous, right?
Right.
So it
homosexual, same-sex attracted.
Right. Homosexuality was not the issue. Which is sorry, I'm going off on tangents now. I'll stop after this. But that's another thing that, you know, made this journey that we're going down, Aaron, fruitful to me is, again, in reflecting on conversations with my wife, being a lesbian did not cause her distress. Being same-sex attracted, being with women, wanting to seek relationships with women did not cause her distress. That was not related to her dysphoria, her experiences of feeling uncomfortable looking in the mirror, right, at her body, at the female parts of her body. Like these things were tangible and distinct. And she feels confident about that. And it feels really silly to beat her into saying, and not that anyone's trying to do this, but to be like, no, it was just internalized homophobia. Because no, she didn't have internalized homophobia and she didn't experience external homophobia either, you know? So this was just, and so what do we make of it then? Because that's supposed to be our answer and our explanation as to what is driving and causing the dysphoria for at least some segment of these females and males. So what if it's not? Are we just supposed to not believe them at that point? It's like, so why are we supposed to, if someone says I experienced this trauma and this is what eventually led me down the path of transition, we're supposed to believe that unquestioningly. But if someone says I had no discomfort with being homosexual, that did not, that is not part of why I wanted to do this, we push back.
Right. Yeah. It's because I think that the gender critical is a very specific worldview and ideology that it rests very firmly in this concept of homophobia and internalized homophobia.
Yeah.
And I think there's a number of reasons for that. It could be a whole video probably as to how that came about and why it's so clung to. But yeah, it is quite remarkable that they insist that people have this trauma experience, even when they're saying, no, I don't have that trauma experience. You think you should be happy for people that don't have an experience of trauma or homophobia, but they really want you to. Yeah.
Right. And this is an issue that is, I'm not going to say that it's ubiquitous. This is an issue across different scientific and psychological domains where there is almost this resistance to good news. Right.
Right. Or trans people aren't more prone to suicide or whatever.
Right.
It's this should be good news. Right.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Or the research that was, looking into children who had suffered abuse. And it's like, well, actually, this doesn't always lead to PTSD and drug addiction and this. And it's like, this is, hold on. We're not saying don't care for people when they experience this, but this should be objectively good news, right? It's like by saying that the trans people are not killing them, 41% of trans people do not attempt or complete suicide. That's not saying cut off mental health care from trans people, but let's take some good news here and just live in reality. But there is a real resistance to that on kind of both sides, again, of this culture war for different reasons. And it's interesting and frustrating. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I shall go back now.
Because obviously in my head, I was a straight male.
Is that how you define now?
Yes. So yeah, I see myself as a straight male.
So I define as transmasculine. My sexuality is based on that fact. So
what would your sexuality be called? That's a video by itself.
I would definitely call myself pansexual because who I'm attracted to isn't based on people's genitals or whether they're masculine or feminine. I'm just into people. It's like bisexual, but it encompasses more than the binary, in my opinion. But actually, the definition of bisexual has changed to encompass being pansexual.
So what is the difference then? I guess, is it just that pansexual just hits the point home harder? Is that even a sentence? It basically enforces the point that you are not attracted to people based on their gender in any way.
That's right.
And it's more about the person.
Yeah.
And just that it's a body.
Just a body.
A soul.
I'm attracted to the soul and the heart.
To be honest.
So if it wasn't obvious, we now see the two sides, as you were talking about, Aaron, right? That we're hypothesizing that this guy in the pink shirt is the sort of standard autoandrophile. He's describing being a lesbian before, but never being comfortable with that label, always seeing himself as a straight man. And now post-transition, basically that's sort of being how he sees himself. And then this other guy, it's so sweet watching this because he hasn't been poisoned by either side of this, really, because he just says flat out, oh yeah, my sexuality, I'm transmasculine and my sexuality is based around that. And then his friend says to him, okay, so what is the name of that? And he really trips up, and that made me a little sad, because it's like, this is I think the point that maybe some autogynophiles feel, where there's this thing that they intuitively feel and understand about themselves, but they don't have the language for, because he's acknowledging that his gender identity is his sexuality. But then when asked, okay, what's that called? He's like, well, I guess it's called, pansexual. And then he starts focusing on the external, because it's not really about the femininity or the masculinity or it's about the person, the soul. And that all is probably true. This trans man probably has a pretty flexible sexuality that would not be surprising at all. Lots of females do, right? All this. but he starts with this confidently. And again, we agree that
Yeah.
his trans masculinity probably does play a huge role in his sexuality. But he didn't have the words for it. So he
Right.
proclaims it, but then when trying to, okay, what does that mean? What is that called? He didn't have a way to describe it accurately.
Right. Yeah. So the other one is trying to basically say to get him to identify with a label for a target sexuality, like
Right.
what, like to have a label that describes what his target sexuality is. But he's basically saying, no, my entire sexuality is just being transmasculine. Like,
Right.
and then so everybody else, like, yeah, because he's attracted to anyone who's going to affirm his gender as being like this non-binary masculine trans guy, right?
Right.
And yeah, he doesn't have a target sexuality. It's just
Right.
his sexuality. Like you said, his sexuality is being transmasculine. And yeah, I hope we aren't too much labeled transphobes, and these people can actually,
Yeah.
get this message as well, that, it's like your sexuality just can be not target specific. Yeah.
Right. Your sexuality might be right. You might be autosexual. You might be autoandrophilic. Your sexuality might really be so tightly wound around the way you see yourself. And again, I don't think that's like so abnormal. It goes back to what you've been saying, how sort of autosexuality plays a role in everyone's sexuality as a theory
Mhm.
of how these sort of domains work. And I think that's probably true to a certain extent, right? It's like, it doesn't make you a freak. Like not everyone, a lot of people, I would think more for females, but I don't know exactly, right? Sort of like how they're gonna feel, and like, all of that is playing into their sexual attraction. But yeah, for someone to just come out and say, I'm transmasculine and that is the basis for my sexuality, he's feeling this on some
Right.
internal like that. It makes sense to him, but the second he has to put that to words, it completely falls apart because he doesn't have the words for it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think that's where I come down with our theory. We get a lot of pushback, and some of it's fair. A lot of it's fair, at least in terms of like, we're not professionals. We haven't tested this. Now, I don't think there are incredible ways to test this, but like, all of these things are true. However, to me, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter, because it is the spontaneous internal experience of these people. So even if we're not fully understanding the mechanism that's going on, or if we're misdiagnosing the mechanism, we are expressing an internal state that even some trans people feel, but literally don't have the words to express. And again, we obviously didn't put this in this guy's set, because this was recorded 4 years ago, right?
Right.
So it's like,
and I had
even
no
if
idea who these people were until a couple
Exactly.
days ago when I found this. Yeah.
Exactly. So like, even if we are wrong about the name, and we're wrong about the mechanism, and it's not ETII, and and it's not, let's say it's not a perfect analog of what happens in males with AGP, this is an experience that is spontaneously happening. Yeah.
Right.
And that's worth talking about and getting to the core of, especially if for any portion of people, this knowledge helps them make a better decision about what to do with transition. That's worth it. So, yeah, I hope people can understand that in sort of our mission here of what we're trying to do. But yeah.
Me too. Well put.
Okay.
It is silly how we all get caught up in labels.
Yeah, completely.
Because
there's so many restrictions that go with that. Let's do away with labels. That's the future. In the past, even though I didn't feel fully comfortable, I was connected to the idea of being a lesbian or gay. Although I always felt like a bit of an alien and a bit of a weird outsider within those spaces. I denied myself being attracted to masculine people because I just was not confident with my own masculinity, and I wasn't ready to embrace that. So I just kind of avoided that whole thing altogether.
I used to, I think, seek out like really feminine people to make myself feel more masculine.
Right, to contrast.
Exactly.
Yourself,
but now that I am really comfortable in myself as a guy, like I don't seek out that super femininity in somebody. I actually I'm attracted to girls that are perhaps a bit of a tomboy, you know, shorter hair, like just people that are a bit different, not afraid to be like,
Dead alternative.
Dead alternative girls, yeah. yeah.
But yeah, completely
My
metasexuality, he just
partner,
explained.
Yeah, and this is so cool. I hope our dear listeners are getting such a kick out of this the way that I am, because again, this was recorded 4 years ago. These people are just speaking spontaneously about their experience, and I know there is something like there is some level of warranted skepticism for what we say here, and even the guests that we bring on, because we're asking them questions and they are framing their answers in like the theory that they know that we're promoting, right? And all of this. These
Right.
guys are not. They're not. They don't know our theory. They might not like our theory had they ever heard it. This was recorded 4 years ago, and so it really is cool to hear people say the things that we are saying happen, right? Which is, I saw myself as a lesbian. I didn't allow myself to be interested in masculine people because I wasn't confident in my masculinity. Another word for that is I was horrified by my femininity, right? And so
Right.
that contrast
Yep.
there. And then the gentleman in the pink, right, saying like I always went for super, super, super feminine women because of the contrast that created, which again doesn't seem to be part of typical homosexuality, or
Right.
not intuitively, at least. Yeah, not intuitively,
Right.
at least.
Right. And he's saying exactly, obviously he doesn't go all the way to being gay, but essentially that is the lesbian to, you know, gay trans man pipeline, is this, I now feel comfortable in my own masculinity, what I'm
Right.
projecting, and therefore he doesn't need the hyper feminine girlfriend. He can have, you know, he can be attracted to, you know, like the more tomboy type, because he has physically manifested masculinity to such a degree that he doesn't need the metasexuality to compensate as much as he did previously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And this is also, it's kind of interesting if you peel, this is just occurring to me now, but if you peel this back, so guy on the left, pink shirt, he was formerly a lesbian, and he wanted to be with super feminine women. So sorry, I'm losing my words here.
The contrast.
So the contrast, yeah, is prominent. But then if you strip away the fact that what he looks like now and that he's a trans man, if you kind of reconceptualize him as a butch lesbian of some sort, him being interested in other butch women, that's another thing that we kind of see, right? The butch for butch as like a potential AAP thing. So this idea, right, that he has this capacity to be interested in more masculine women, right? But like he says, I previously sought out really feminine women because that made me feel more masculine.
Right. And obviously he starts the video by saying he liked the idea of people writing fan fiction about the two of them. Like, so clearly, like he's not entirely unattracted to the whole, butch for butch thing, if you want to, use those terms.
Right. Yeah. Right. And the trans mask guy on the right, he's just fully saying like he's into masculinity, you know, now that he is masculine himself, he's pansexual now, right? It's like everybody, anything will do. And that's interesting too, because, and this is a little tricky, none of these things in isolation are proof of anything, but it's the cluster of all of these things together. But we do know, at least through, you know, Phil writes about this in his book, but just from people's experiences with autogynephilia and autoandrophilia, this attraction to gender bending is something that seems really common in this sort of autosexual space. Obviously, regular people can also be attracted, you know, to gender bendy people, but that seems more atypical, right? It seems much more common for people like this, to be interested in the masculine woman or the feminine man, the people who are blending these things.
Right. It seems like a lot of heterosexual people have a preference for androgynous people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Who is non-binary femme, when we're seen out together, we look like a heterosexual couple, and that kind of bugs me because it's like people don't know our history and don't know where we come from. If I see queer people when we're out, I kind of want to be like, you know, hey, you know,
Yeah.
I'm one of you, but I'm worried sometimes that actually I'm not read as queer or as different.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel sad, because I quite like the fact that I have this unique, different history, and I quite enjoy being an outsider as well.
In real contrast to you, I've always been quite like outspoken about the fact that I am straight and that my partners are straight, and it's not to be like, oh, you know, I'm straight, blah, blah, but I just really like to make that point of the fact that, you know, like we always say, like trans men are men. I love that somebody that is purely only attracted to male people, you know, have that ability to not see me as any different from any other male. I think that's
totally valid.
Yeah.
Pause.
When I came out to my
So the taller guy is basically, the transmasculine one is basically saying it's really important to him for people to know that he's trans, for people to know that he's queer, because that's kind of core to his identity, his sexuality. And so he's got this quite feminine girlfriend, and he doesn't like that people perceive them as a straight couple, because he doesn't like thinking of himself or being thought of as a straight man. And then the other one is saying the exact opposite, right? It's like he really needs people to see and perceive him as a straight man, and he's more attracted to women who are solely attracted to straight men. It's kind of like meta squared there. It's like not only you know, is he attracted to them because they're feminine, but he's extra attracted to them because they're only attracted to men. And so it's the double validation there.
This reminds me of, gosh, I wish I was more organized. One of the books that I read, it might have been the FTM book that I know you and I both have read parts of. It's like literally called FTM.
Okay.
Written by, at the time, a woman who is now a trans man. And so like the author name has been changed on more recent editions of the book. But there was this explicit talk, I think it's this book, you know, I'll go back and look, but where, they're taught, and this book was written back in the 90s, and it interviewing people of their experiences who grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, right? And so of people saying that exact thing, that them looking, and this was in the frame of lesbianism too, of these like same-sex attracted females, of them looking specifically wanting, right, straight women, someone who is going to specifically see them in that way that they know is attracted to the opposite sex, and that being really, really important.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. I think, I'm not sure if metasexuality is the right term there, but it does.
Yeah, I think it is. Like, it's part of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially when we conceptualize metasexuality as like, it's not really its own thing. It's basically like, it's almost, I don't know, I don't have the best words right now, but it kind of like we said in our conversation last week with Moon, and like we talked about with Annie, of like metasexuality is just like everywhere it for trans people and for auto heterosexuals. So it's everything. Right. It is metasexuality to seek out people who are straight or bisexual because of the way they're going to see you, or the possibility of how they could see you. So that feels like clear-cut metasexuality to me. Because metasexuality is really so all-encompassing. This reminds me, I'm sorry if I do so many tangents, Aaron, I'm the worst, but
you're all good. Because hey, look,
Nora,
we are most of the way through this video and only 30 minutes in, so we're on good track.
That's true. Nora has been talking about lately on Twitter how gay GP or autogynephiles who are into men, or potentially some people who would be classified as HSTS, Nora's been conceptualizing that as basically just behavioral AGP. Like, it's like, why, which is sort of metasexuality of what we're talking about there, right? It's behaviorally, I want to be seen and treated as a woman. And so I seek partners, right, who are going to see me in that way, where there's that dynamic. Maybe I'm just trying to flatter Nora, because I would really like Nora to come on the show if you're watching, Nora. I know I already asked you this privately. But that makes sense to me. And again, it's almost just a different way of framing this metasexuality thing. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to describe it, in my opinion, that metasexuality is basically interpersonal AGP or AAP.
Right. Yeah.
especially in the terms that these people are using, right? Like I thought someone, it's important to me that the woman that I be with is straight so that I know that she really sees me as a man. That's behavioral
Yeah.
autoandrophilia. It's
Yep.
also metasexuality, but again, I think these terms are we're applying these terms to concepts that we don't entirely like. We don't have a perfect map of what all these mechanisms are. But so I
Right.
think that framing that she's been going with of gay GP basically being people with severe behavioral autogynephilia, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does. It makes sense to me too. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't thought about that
Yeah.
before, but I think, yeah, that sounds accurate to frame metasexuality as behavioral or interpersonal. Yeah, autosexuality. I can see it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we'll go back to this now.
Parents as trans, my mom, the first thing she said was, Fox, who's gonna love you? And I was just like, oh my God, Mom, like
I know, it's horrible.
It's a horrible question, but like I said to my mom, I said, well, I've got to love myself first, and then it's about finding someone who also loves me.
But that's something that holds a lot of people back from transitioning, I think. Because one of the reasons I didn't transition sooner, I always said to my friends, is because I'm worried I'll never find anyone that finds me attractive or finds love. And then I reached a point where I was like, well, I've just got to put myself first. And then
same for me. It was like a do or die situation. But yeah, I think that is a huge worry. I was with various partners and mentioned, about being trans for quite a few years, and nothing against my partners at all, but they'd always say things like, well, you're so pretty as you are, or but they just couldn't imagine me being otherwise. And someone even said to me, the great thing about you is that you kind of like walk the line of gender, and that you're so androgynous, like that's your selling point, so why would you want to change that and become a big old butch guy? And I was just like, manly man, like you, like
pink top.
That's right. But yeah, it's so nice to realize that actually there's so many different ways to be masculine or be a man. People are attracted to masculine or feminine. They're not particularly attracted to genitals. I don't think it's more about.
No, it's not about that, is it?
When they say people, they mean women. Right. Also, obviously, there are plenty of women who are very specific in their genital preferences here. But
absolutely right.
People are attracted to masculine or feminine, not the genitals. It's like, I think you're kind of projecting a lot right there.
Right. And there is something true about that, but it's wrong. It is true. People are attracted to masculinity and femininity, and that all of those signals are what people are picking up on. But it is more so that these indicators are telling me about the sex of the person, not that if the vibe is okay, I literally don't care what's underneath the clothes or something like that.
Right.
And this is another example of what we talked about with Moon last time, of just like, not just trans people, not just autosexuals, but just like projecting what they feel and just assuming that's obviously the case for everyone.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did find it really interesting when the trans masculine identified one who was basically saying, he was really kind of taken aback when his mom said, who will love you, and it was like that was so not even a consideration in his brain, because in his brain he's like, he needs to be what he loves. Like, he's like, well, I've got to love myself first. And then I'll, may or may not find someone else, but that's irrelevant. Like that's an afterthought, essentially.
Right. Which I think is a big deal, and sort of gets to this autosexuality thing. And it's something that we've talked about, like in your story too, just for other people. It's like, it is a big deal when someone is basically saying, okay, even if this does mean that I will never have someone who's interested in me and wants to be with me, like this is important enough. It's important enough that to me, I'm good enough, I'm attractive enough, that I'm aligned is probably the word that they would use. But yeah, that's not typical, especially if the working hypothesis is that these are people transing the gay away, right? Like, it's like they're so uncomfortable being gay, and so they want to make themselves potentially partnerless. Like that doesn't exactly track to me, right? Or like right, they don't want to be gay anymore, they want to be straight, but they still want to be with women. It's like, well, no, a lot of people who transition say that they got to a point where they were like, yeah, I don't care basically if I ever have another sexual partner again in my life.
Right. Right.
Now, do I think like, yeah.
The
go ahead.
a lot of the logic on the gender critical side is that that we transition to not just solve like, oh, we got this internalized homophobia thing, but that also that now we're going to have more dating prospects when we look like the opposite sex. It's like, it was very clear, like in this person's example, you know, if he was a lesbian pre-transition, his mom going, who's going to love you if you do this? It completely defies the logic of, oh, if you're a lesbian who's attracted to women, making yourself look like a man is going to get you more women. It's like, that's not how it works. And people intuitively know this, but the gender critical side has to basically think like that's a selling point. And that's really not because of they need everything to be homophobia. And that's not what's going on here.
No, you're right. And there's a bit of hypocrisy, or at least double speak going on the gender critical side, because you're right. They will both say that people are transitioning because they think, right, like it's so hard to find women when you're a gender nonconforming woman. And so instead, if you just look like a man, then it'll be easier for dating. But they will also say somewhat spitefully, like, you will have no dating prospects, you know, doing this. No one's interested in that. You know, you're only going to have the fetishists after you. And again, it's like, it's an important conversation to have, right? Like trans people need to have their eyes wide open about some of the types of people who are going to chase after them, right? Who are going to be particularly interested in them and all of these things. But yeah, there's a little bit of double speak there of like, yeah, it totally makes sense that these young girls, you know, like want to, and I guess maybe it's not contradictory. Like they could be saying, oh yeah, these girls think this is going to happen, but in reality, they're going to be smashing their, you know, their options. So I guess that might be sort of consistent, but it is true that like, right, that's not really, it doesn't seem like that's actually what's controversial statement is about to come out of my mouth.
Go for it.
It seems like the people who say that they were transitioning to have more partners, right? Because it was just so hard to be a gay version of themselves, and it would be easier to be the straight version of themselves. People who, in my observation, anecdotally, seem to be saying that are the detransitioners, or the desisters, are the people who basically opted out of it, came back, decided against, are living in their lesbian identity or whatever, or their gay man identity, and who are saying, right, like this was my thought process. And then we have the trans people, the people both ideologically trans and non-ideologically trans people who are saying, well, no, actually, right? Like I was basically just willing to forgo sexuality. This wasn't really me, you know, working out my sexuality with transition. I was essentially willing to forgo it because changing my body, changing the way I see myself felt so urgent, pressing, and so much more important. And I know that there's issues with that, right? You could say, oh, yeah, well, the trans people are still living in it. They're still believing in the ideology. And so that's why they don't see it this way. And that's possible. But there are people like you know, there are also people who are trans, who are not ideologically captured in the same way, who describe their experiences similar to these guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, a lot of like the detransitioner stories are heavily influenced by the gender critical ideology. It's like what, you know, how they reframe their experience, how, you know, what gets the likes, what gets the support is, you know, kind of adopting that messaging and a lot of times completely believing it. Like it feels true. It makes sense. But yeah, just like when you enter the trans realm, you conceptualize your dysphoria in this way, and when you enter the detrans realm, you conceptualize it as, again, like this external victimization.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's like it's hard to be a detransitioner. You know, people like to say like, oh, it's an easy grift, and you know, like you detransition and all the right wing people are going to want to talk to you and give you attention and have you come speak and all that. And there's something to that, I guess, but you are in a tough position because there's really not a lane. I would say there's more space in the gender critical movement than there is in the trans rights activism to walk a middle line, but a lot of the GC movement is and has become, and there's been different strands and things have kind of opened and closed, but is sort of more militant in like what you're allowed to believe and what you're allowed to say. And so there really are sort of two routes for detransitioners, or three routes: stay silent and just quietly detransition and live your life, right? But if you want to speak about your experience, you basically have two options, which is kind of go the full GC route or go the righteous detransitioner route, which is like, it didn't work for me, but I would never want to impose, you know, my one thing on all the other trans people. And we see some of those too, the TRAs who detransitioned basically, right? But they're really, it is hard to be a trans person and go out there, or to be a detrans person or an ideologically desisted person, right? And go out there and say things that are inconvenient to both sides of this culture war.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Very true. Very fair. I feel like I am a complete weirdo, and like my brain doesn't really work that way, and so I think I kind of miss people need, you know, again, different conversation, but I think it's something I have a blind spot about, I guess.
Yeah, no, right. It's something that you and I talked about a little bit, like, or actually we didn't talk about it. I was reading your tweets, and so I feel like I was talking to you about it because I'm hearing your voice in your tweets.
Right.
But you made a comment just today on Twitter, which is like, you're talking to someone about this sort of activism and whatever, and you said something like, I feel like we're talking past each other. Like, I'm not interested in allies. Like, you're really not trying to join a team. You're on a team that fits best, right? Your assortment of feelings, views, experiences, whatever. But yeah, you're not interested in allyship, and that is unique, and that is, I'm sure, a blessing and a curse in different ways. But obviously, I think it's a strength in the domain of
finding truth.
Yeah, or at least searching, right, searching for it, or honestly, which is all we can really do. Yeah. All right.
If any of you have got any tales to tell or any opinions, comment below.
If your sexuality has changed based on your transition, we'd love to hear about it.
Me and Fox have just filmed a video for My Generations channel, which is all about our top surgeries. So if you want to see us topless, then go and click the link below.
It's a little preview.
Oh, naughty Fox.
But yeah, there's some autosexuality right there.
I know,
my
right?
chest.
Yeah. But yeah, no, they were cool. They were likable. I'd be interested to see, like you said, they haven't, or like you said to me maybe before we started recording, they haven't posted much recently, or at least together. But I'd be interested to see where these guys are right now in their thought process and how they're living their lives.
Yeah. I would be as curious as well. It's always I mean, obviously the detrans wave, we were just talking about the detransitioners, but I mean, it's definitely I've been saying, you know, an incoming tsunami for a while now, and who's in it, I don't know. It's a lot of people do seem like, even people who are quite seem to be quite pretty obviously from our perspective auto heterosexual, without having that knowledge about themselves, unlearn the ideology, realize it's bullshit, and detransition without even really considering why they transitioned, the relief from dysphoria, what it's going to be like on the other side when people start hemming or herring them again, like, and then they you know, seem to be like in this chronic struggle of like, this is so hard, but I'm committed to it. And because the dysphoria doesn't go away, they just they forgot what it felt like before they transitioned and before they bought the ideology. They unlearn it and they go, it's bullshit, I'm going to detransition. And so there's no reason to think that these two, maybe one or both of them, didn't come to the same, especially because they're British, right? It's got so gender critical over there in the last 3 years. I'd be curious to see where they are now. But yeah, us having identified them as pretty concretely autosexual doesn't mean that they're happy and flourishing necessarily in their
Right.
trans status.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you and I come down to, like, I don't know how much any trans person can happily flourish in their trans status if they're not really grounded in reality. And a lot of trans ideology or trans activism doesn't allow you to ground your experience in reality. Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of just unsustainable, you know, when reality is constantly knocking at the door.
Right. And what type of unsustainable is that? I don't know. Like, you know, is it potentially like psychological breakdowns in some type of recurrence? Maybe. Is it even potentially like going back for more surgeries? You know, it's like whatever way you can find to sort of like deal with, if you're not living fully in reality, but you're still dealing with the consequences of the cognitive dissonance.
Right.
People deal with that in different ways.
True. Yeah. Ever different searching.
Yeah.
Well, I hope if either of them see this or become aware of it, neither take offense. I'd
love to talk to them.
Right.
Very likable. Yeah, totally.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Yeah, let us know what you think about this style of episode. We're interested in doing stuff like this, doing some react videos, and kind of like I said earlier, not to dunk on these people, but to try to contextualize their experience through what we see as an autosexual framework. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Thanks all.